Hello, dear listener. James here. If you're listening to this the day it comes out, October 27th, there are a couple things I wanted to put on your radar. The first is that RTD is having a board meeting on Tuesday, October 28th to discuss, among other things, the Finishing Fast Tracks report. You'll hear about this during the episode, but this is a great chance to make your voice heard about how you believe RTD should prioritize spending and completing commitments related to fast tracks. If you missed that, there is also a feedback form you can fill out at the bottom of a webpage, and I'll link that in the show notes. The other thing I wanted to bring to your attention is that the 1700 block of Winecoop is shutting down to car traffic until November 1st. The city is using this shutdown to collect information on what people think of the street and how it can be reimagined. Head on down, check it out, and let the city know what you think. Thanks, and enjoy the show. Hello, I'm James Warren.
And I'm Andy Cushion.
And this is the Denver Urbanism Podcast, a podcast on all things city building in the Bussin city of Denver. Well, dear listener, I'm sure you've missed us for a long time. We have not released an episode, but that is because we wanted to build suspension for everybody's favorite guest. Today we are joined by Jill Locantore.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah,
welcome back.
Welcome back. We hope to make this a regular thing. And today we are really excited to talk about a project that is near and dear to your heart. But before we get into it, would you mind just giving our listeners a little bit of a lowdown on who you are? Again, most people listening will know, or they listened to the previous episode, know who you are, but we may have some rogue listeners as well, and we'd love to introduce you to them.
Some newbies. I hope we have some new people in the movement.
Yeah.
I'm Jill Locantore. I'm the Executive Director of the Denver Streets Partnership. Our mission is to reduce Denver's unsustainable dependence on cars and to design people-first communities. So basically, we want people to be able to thrive in Denver without having to drive everywhere they go, and that means that they have safe and convenient ways to get around, like walking and biking and taking transit.
Yeah, great. And if that sounds of interest to you, I would go and listen to our earlier podcast with Jill. It was a hit, great episode, and check out Denver Streets Partnership and all the amazing work that they've worked on over the years to kind of get yourself acquainted.
We've talked about DSP, at this point, 5 or 6 times on the pod. So I think the listeners are,
you
primed.
Can't really have a Denver
here.
Urbanism podcast without, it's mostly the Denver Streets Partnership podcast.
I think you have to tell people things 8 times before they remember it. So
That's true.
You have to have me on 5 more times now.
Right, yeah. We'll just
Don't
have to
tempt
keep
us.
summoning Jill. Let's talk about the reason for being of today's episode, which is a vision for transit in the Denver region. What am I talking about?
Better transit can benefit our region in so many ways. It could help us reduce our greenhouse gas emissions and air pollution. It can make life more affordable by reducing transportation costs for people. It'll go a long way towards reducing traffic fatalities because transit is the safest way to travel around. It can increase access to opportunity, particularly for people who don't drive or can't drive for whatever reason. But right now, our transit system really isn't that useful for a lot of people. And so ridership is low and it's actually declining. So we wanted to put forward a vision of what would it take to actually make transit a useful, viable option for Denver residents, such that we do see a dramatic increase in ridership and are able to achieve all those benefits for transit in our region? And how much would it cost? So that we could start a conversation with the community and with leaders about, hey, this is a really great idea. Why don't we do this?
I spent a little while reading this vision plan and found a lot of this really, really inspiring. I think we forget sometimes, as we get so used to talking about the minutia, the importance of just planting the flag. Here is the goal. Here is what we want. Here is the priority. Get more people, more frequent transit, connect more jobs, more places, move people faster, and do it for real. We'll talk a little later about the question of money, but I think just to emphasize it first, where we are. In 2025, RTD has built out a lot of projects and has a lot of service that is being used, but they have less service and less frequency and less routes running at the sort of frequency that they used to than we did 5 years ago. And that depressing state of affairs is not going to change unless we, as advocates and as policymakers who might be listening, as anybody who has the ability to get their apartment building and neighborhood eco-pass or whatever, that's not going to change until people actually take that step. So the flag that you folks are planting, what are some of the kind of big targets? How will you know you feel like you guys have hit it?
So really our goal is to increase ridership. So make transit actually a really useful and attractive option for a lot of people to choose instead of driving. And it's a pretty simple formula. For transit to be useful for people, it has to be fast, frequent, and reliable. And one of the biggest areas where our transit system currently fails that test is frequency. We have a lot of bus routes, we have a lot of rail lines, but many of those buses might come only every 30 minutes or once an hour, and they stop running after 5 p.m. or maybe they only run on weekdays and not on weekends. And that's just not that useful to people. So our vision is, how can we dramatically increase the number of transit routes where the bus comes so frequently you don't even have to look at the schedule. You can just walk to the closest transit stop to your house and you know a bus is going to come in the next 5 or 10 minutes and it's going to get you where you need to go. And that means investing in service. We talk a lot about infrastructure, and that's important too. Having things like dedicated bus lanes help ensure that the buses go fast and they don't get stuck in traffic. But again, if there's no bus in that bus lane, it's not that useful. And so what we're really focusing attention on is we need to not just build infrastructure, but we really need to have a sustained, dedicated funding source that allows us to run the buses way more frequently than we do today.
Frequency is freedom is a thing that I think you actually introduced me to as a concept originally. And I think it came from Jarrett Walker of Human Transit. And like the more you think about it, the more it makes sense, which is like it is safer for you as an individual, particularly for women who are going to the bus to show up and the bus comes every 10 minutes because you're just not waiting around a long time. The other thing is that waiting for transit is the worst part of a transit ride. I would much rather have a 45-minute bus ride and a 5-minute wait than a 30-minute wait and a 15-minute bus ride.
Can I raise the stakes on that one? I'm gonna say the worst part is when the bus comes early and it doesn't come for another 20 or 30 minutes or something like that. That's the worst. That's criminal. I would rather the bus be 1 minute late than 1 minute early. But when I used to live on West Colfax and the 16 came every 10 minutes, I didn't really care if the bus came early. It doesn't
matter, right? Yeah. Frequency helps address these issues of reliability for exactly that reason. If you miss a bus that only comes once an hour, now you have to wait 2 hours to get to your destination. But if it's every 5 minutes, you know, who really cares? That's margin of error. And it also helps with the speed, too, especially if you have to transfer, right, from one route to another. If you have a half-hour wait between one route and then the next one, that dramatically increases the length of your trip. But you get off one bus, the next one comes in a few minutes. It helps with the speed. So frequency is kind of the foundational factor here.
But frequency is not the only part of the plan. I think to James's other point about waiting at the bus stop, you know, listeners know from their own bus stop, you probably don't have a super luxe bus stop. You're lucky to have a bench, as James knows well, having built many benches and left them for folks to use. Part of your plan, you know, you're hitting on a number of other things, too, about upgrading the region's bus stops, extending transit to places it doesn't currently go, using microtransit where it makes sense, like actually connecting to Red Rocks Amphitheater, which is the ask, you know? And that doubling the service is not just about taking a bus that is already useful and making it most useful. Some buses are not useful really right now. And that's just like it's sad, but it's just true. Like we live right by York Street. The bus that comes down York Street comes once an hour. I have a friend who lives in DU who is coming to a party tonight at my house. That friend is not going to take the bus.
And every listener is invited to the party.
But don't take the bus.
You won't catch it. And so much so that like when that road diet, which we talked about on a past podcast, happened on York Street, you know, the planners were talking in a progressive way about also trying to make sure that the bus was more reliable and was able to kind of move faster down the corridor in a way that for a lot of residents just kind of struck them as laughable. Because if there's only so many buses a day, if it's an hourly bus, you know, that investment does not go nearly as far as when you can make that bus come every 15 minutes or every 10 minutes. So, you know, the vision is not just, again, take the service by your house and make it faster, but actually new patterns emerge. So you guys talk about, for instance, increasing almost 1 million more people than currently have frequent bus service would gain frequent bus service.
And what do we mean by frequent here? Just so that we're setting the level.
So Denver actually came up with a really great definition of frequent transit when they were coming up with their city-specific transit plan, and they said we want to have a frequent network, like some east-west buses and north-south buses that all come frequently. And by their definition, it's buses that come at least every 15 minutes or more frequently.
Yeah.
They come from early in the morning until late at night. So for your party, people aren't stranded at 10 o'clock at night when they're trying to get home. Or I don't know how wild your parties are. I don't know, maybe 1 in the morning. But we want a long span of transit service, and they're 7 days a week. So it doesn't matter if you're using the bus for your 9 to 5 job, or you're using it to go to a concert downtown on the weekend, or you work different hours because you don't have a traditional office job. The transit system works for you.
This is all really great framing, and I think that hopefully the listener's picking up that like a lot of what we were talking about here is like transforming our routes to be much more frequent. That's like the main thrust. Andy, to your point, there's a lot of other stuff in there. There's workforce, and we can talk a little bit about that, but like really just upping a lot of our routes right now to be frequent, which I would love. I live on an hourly bus route. It, I believe, is like more or less an equity investment into my neighborhood. But like it could, if you had a 15-minute service in my neighborhood, it would really transform it. But I think that there may be some critics out there who say, well, look, after the pandemic, consumer behavior changed. People stopped wanting to use transit and instead are consuming other types of transportation. Some e-bikes, right? E-bikes are much more popular, but also just like more car travel. And so like, you know, you can throw all the bus service you want at people. They're not going to ride it. Break that down. Well, what's wrong with that idea?
Oh, there's multiple things wrong with that. So yes, the pandemic definitely changed travel behaviors. The number one thing that it changed is work-related travel. Because a lot of us now either spend all or part of our time working remotely. And so you have much more demand for the traditional 9 to 5, going into your office in downtown and going back home in the suburbs. But people are still traveling. It's just for different reasons now. Now people are running errands, or they're going to school, or they're going to visit family, or they're going to access healthcare or social services. And they still need transportation for all of those reasons. But we designed our transportation system, especially the current transit system, around the 9 to 5 commute. So a lot of the routes just go from the suburbs into downtown Denver. They're primarily during the day on weekdays, and that's just not useful for the full range of trips that people are making. You do see driving has bounced back to where it was before the pandemic. So again, that indicates people aren't just staying at home. Like that's not how we're living our lives now, is we are only at home. We are traveling, but we don't have a transit system that is designed to serve that broader range of trips, not just the work trips. And we've also dramatically reduced the service to where it was prior to the pandemic. You see in other cities that either didn't do that, didn't reduce their service during the pandemic, or restored it pretty quickly after the pandemic back to the same previous levels, that the ridership came right back.
Interesting, yeah.
So there's a pretty direct correlation between how frequently do you make the buses run and do people actually use it, as long as you have the routes in the high density areas where there's lots of people and lots of destinations that people are trying to get to.
And to that point about the high density areas, we're going to talk about fast tracks a little bit, but one of the things that has happened with fast tracks is we have had now like maybe 2 development cycles of a lot of apartment buildings near rail stops. Rail stops are also a place where a lot of the buses go, right? You know, the major possibility for interchange. We're having kind of the new context now where it's not just about running buses through established neighborhoods, you know, trying to connect someone from Park Hill down to, you know, Hilltop. There are new destinations that are kind of at the beginning and end of each of these lines as well, you know, that then connect to more regional service. This plan is just about that bus service, that is that connection that, you know, allows then the people who have moved into these new areas where they were kind of promised transit as a viable option for their life to actually follow through on that promise, not just by taking the rail one of 2 ways, but by also taking several different buses that would connect right to their rail station. We have embraced, in a way that is progressive and forward-looking in Denver, like a lot of TOD. We should be very pleased with that, but transit-oriented development requires that we follow through on the promise of actually having transit available for the people who live in those places.
Yeah, and there's been a lot of focus on Fast Tracks, which is the voter-approved transit plan from more than 20 years ago now. There's been a lot of focus on the plan to build out the rail system and the fact that we didn't fully complete that. There are still segments of rail that voters are waiting to see completed. But a lot of people don't know there was also a plan to enhance bus service. Specifically, as you were saying, so that you had connectivity between the rail into other parts of the region that aren't served by the rail. And in fact, the plan called for a 30% increase in the level of bus service from 2003 to 2025, where we are today. In fact, bus service is now 17% lower.
Oh, wow.
In 2025 than it was in 2003. So not only did we fail to enhance the bus service is actually worse than it was when we approved the Fast Tracks vote. At the same time that we have completed 75% of the rail system. So we think it's well past time that we need a new forward-looking vision for how transit's going to serve us in the next 20 years. And part of that is continuing the infrastructure investments, continuing to build out things like rail or bus rapid transit lines. But we really need to refocus on the service levels and increasing the service levels. You know, the population has grown by nearly 1 million people since we passed Fast Tracks, and yet we have less bus service. Like, of course our transit system isn't working very well.
I can already hear the ghost of the still living governor in the room with us right now. Polis is in the room.
He's from Boulder. He's astral projected before.
He's astral
it's not that
projecting into the room. And I can hear him saying, well, look, the bus service is worse since 2003 because RTD is bad governance. You throwing more money at the problem is not going to fix an issue that RTD is just structurally bad. I don't necessarily agree with that, but I think that like a lot of people just kind of feel that RTD fails because it's like governed poorly. You know, I don't want my money going to something that's going to squander it away and, you know, promised me all this stuff and then wasn't able to deliver. So can you speak a little bit to that? How is more money going to fix this? And are there any structural things that need to change in order for this to be successful?
Yeah, I think that's a popular talking point amongst elected officials.
Yeah.
And, you know, talking heads, people who tend to get quoted by the media. If you look at the customer service surveys from RTD, they're generally very positive.
Yeah.
People who actually use the transit system, they like it and they want it to be better. And if you talk to your average citizen, like I said, our population has grown by nearly 1 million people since Fast Tracks was passed in 2004. Most people who live here now either don't remember or didn't vote in 2004 and have no idea what promises were made back then. It is absolutely true that the original Fast Tracks plan overpromised and underdelivered. And it was a funding issue. You know, partly they underestimated how much it would truly cost to build out the system. You know, it required negotiating with the freight railways, and that ended up being wildly expensive. But also, there was a huge economic downturn right after Fast Tracks was passed. That gave a huge hit to their sales tax revenues. The pandemic created a huge hit to their sales tax revenues. And so the reality is today, we just are billions of dollars short for building out the complete original vision of Fast Tracks. And we can continue to beat RTD over the head with that, but just expecting them to deliver on something with not nearly enough funding to make it happen is counterproductive. Like, we're just going to run in circles, pointing fingers at each other. The fact is, we just don't have enough money. That made some financial calculus errors 20 years ago.
Right.
Yeah.
Let's reset where we are today. What are the needs that we have today? Where do we want to go moving forward in the next 20 years? Learn the lessons of Fast Tracks, but come up with a new vision and a new way to fund that vision.
I think one of the things I'm hearing as well is a real call for political courage to actually say, what is the goal? The goal is moving more people in a better way serving them better. We're not going to build new highways through Cap Hill, thank God. So what do we do instead? How do we move people in a way that is faster, which is cost effective? Well, we already know what's a very cost effective way to move people. And people do vote with their feet in those areas where they have frequent service. You do see packed buses already, in a way that RTD wants to respond to, but maybe just doesn't have the resources. So the political courage here is, instead of just kind of hitting RTD over the head, as you describe, for a shrunken level of service per capita, actually saying, okay, the goal is better service, which means more service. Not just some like arbitrarily aesthetically better, but like quantitatively more. So we have to ask leaders, advocates, anybody who really has some kind of connection to this space to step forward and say, all right, maybe we've passed all these bills about accountability and new sort of disclosures that we want them to do. We've seen the transparency. Now let's deliver the next step, which is better service, an actual goal.
So you're talking a little bit about political courage here. And one thing that we know about elected officials is that they tend to not ride the bus, right? I actually loved when CityCast interviewed all the mayoral candidates the last election, and they asked almost all of them, when's the last time you rode transit, right? And we got to hear like Chris Hansen make up a story about like watching druggies outside the bus window or something like that. I think like Ian Tafoya is the only one who could like actually speak to riding a bus, and everyone else was like, I rode the A-line once, it was fine.
There was that elderly lady that lived. Do you remember that?
Oh, yes. The one who wanted to ride her broomstick around and like cast a spell on the city to get rid of the brown cloud. What was her name?
Renata or something?
Yes.
Yeah, that's right. I think she rode the bus. Let's give credit to her.
She didn't need to. She had the magic broom. Okay, so these elected officials are, at best, they're choice riders. They'll never be captive riders. They never have to ride transit. If they do so, they choose to, and they just tend to not choose to. When we're talking about political courage and political vision, I think a lot of people are going to be like, well, if I want an exciting vision for transit, I'm going to go for the more romantic thing, which is trains, right? Like, these people have not had the glorious experience, I think, of just like riding on a bus and having a just swell old time reading while the rain's pattering on the windows or whatever. And this plan doesn't talk about expanding any train lines, doesn't talk about expanding service on rail network as far as I can see. So I'm sure you're going to get some questions. Where are the trains? I love trains. Again, the governor loves trains. Projecting into the room right now saying, where are the trains? So why the focus on buses instead of a rail?
Well, one point of clarification is if we have more money for service, it could mean more frequent service on our existing train lines too.
Great.
Because there are a lot of train lines that are, again, only every 30 minutes. And we would love to see, regardless of whether it's rubber tires or steel tires, we just want it to come more frequently. That's what's important at the end of the day. But I do think, as I was saying, we should learn the lessons of fast tracks. We shouldn't just dismiss it as like, oh, that didn't work out. But what do we learn from that experience? Trains are really expensive. Mm-hmm. They're not only expensive to build, they're expensive to maintain. Mm-hmm. Now that we have built out 75% of the original planned Fast Track's rail network, RTD is looking down the pike at the maintenance costs that's associated with that rail. And that's going to create a huge hit to their budget if we don't get them more revenues, because it's insanely expensive to keep those rails operating in good working condition. And they're also not very flexible. Once you put down the rail, that's where the train is going. Right. And it's very hard to modify that route if circumstances change, right? Like we talked about the pandemic. Before the pandemic, everybody wanted to go downtown. After the pandemic, people have more dispersed locations they're trying to go to, but we built the rails to connect from the suburbs to downtown. Right. So we're stuck with that, right? Buses, they're way less expensive in the first place. You don't necessarily need any new infrastructure. We've got roads. They can
and we
run on
to repave them all
any
the time.
One of those roads. Yes, there's some infrastructure that can make the buses run faster and more reliably, like the BRT on Colfax, but that's not necessary to increase service. It requires much less maintenance. Yeah, you have to replace the bus vehicles every once in a while, but like you said, we're already paying to repave the roads. It's not creating a new maintenance mandate by running the buses more frequently. And they're more flexible. So when travel patterns change, when land use patterns change, you can change that route flexibly to respond to where the transit demand is. And the buses already are the workhorses of the system. The rail, it's important too. We're not saying at all that we should like rip out the rail system. The rail system is great. We'd love to see it continue to expand. It provides an important backbone, but 65% of the ridership today is on the buses. And that's with the buses not even coming that frequently. So we've got this existing network of bus routes that people are already using. If we could just increase the service frequency on those routes, we think we could see a massive increase in ridership for way less money than it would cost to continue to build out rail lines.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, so I got many more questions. Why now? Why are we talking about this in the year of our Lord 2025? And, this is a large-scale investment. Why do we need this right now of all times?
Well, like I've said, it has been more than 20 years since we voters approved fast tracks and started building out that vision. Meanwhile, cities around the country, Los Angeles, Seattle, Salt Lake City, have passed multiple funding measures to continue to expand out their transit system. And again, they're seeing that pay off with increased ridership. We always point to Seattle as a great North Star. They have invested a ton of money in their bus network, frequent buses, and they've seen similar population growth to Denver with no increase in vehicular traffic. Because they're able to give people other options. So we in Denver are really falling behind our peer cities, and we're seeing how that's impacting our lives compared to the transportation options that are available in other cities. And I would say, too, there's just a huge and growing appetite among citizens, residents, for options other than driving.
Yeah.
Just in the last 5 years, I don't even have to introduce myself to people and tell them who I am and what I work on. People just spontaneously start talking to me about biking and transit and walking and how they wish they had better options and how they really don't enjoy driving when they don't have to and would like to have better options. And I feel like the population is ahead of our elected officials in this regard. I mean, I think the Denver Deserves Sidewalks initiative showed that. We could not get the mayor or city council or the head of the Department of Transportation to champion this idea of investing in our sidewalks. And they were very skeptical that the voters would be supportive of that. But surprise, the voters voted yes. We want to spend money on these options to improve mobility options in our region. We had a great success with Denver Deserves Sidewalks. We've had some good success with starting to build out this bike network in Denver. We are by no means done. There's still a lot of work to do there. Transit is really the missing piece where we have just been neglecting and disinvesting and letting our transit system get worse. If we're serious about giving people real options other than driving, which I believe a lot of people want, it means investing in transit at this moment in time.
And it should just be said, just to remind everybody who's a little solipsistic about living in Colorado, that we just don't spend that much money in Colorado on transportation. We really just don't. We have had multiple political cycles about going into the legislature and saying we want to pass some way of raising some more money for transportation, because we just actually spend a lot less on transportation than peer cities, than peer states. There's a lot of reasons for that, but we have to have the courage to say the goal is actually to get a better outcome for the citizens, not just to sort of make do with what we have and make everybody comfortable with making do. We don't have to shrink the scale of our ambitions when it comes to a fairly cost-effective way to do this. Do we want to talk a little bit about costs?
That was gonna be where I take it next.
Before we say some of the numbers related to the service thing, I just want to emphasize how used to hearing in the news about the scale of highways and other infrastructure that everybody's just used to seeing these numbers. And there's a great kind of factoid about when you describe something as several hundred million, people kind of just perceive that as bigger than 1 billion. Several hundred of something seems bigger than one. But I'll just emphasize that, in the last few years, we have rebuilt Central I-70, and that cost well over $1 billion. We're rebuilding Floyd Hill in the mountains right now, which is going to cost $700 million, they say. Could be close to $1 billion by the time it's done. These are projects that, sure, are like maybe important for freight service, or obviously there are people that would use those routes. Those are also projects that have like a major negative effect on the sort of life and the environment around those areas. Expanding highways is not like a, just a good thing that we do for fun all the time. It actually has really negative repercussions. Spending money on increasing bus service, you have all of this stuff about reducing ozone pollution, saving people money because it costs less, like 10 times less, to be a person who takes the bus all the time rather than driving all the time. But you are asking for quite a bit of money. So I think the headline figure is $420 million a year to kind of accomplish this vision of, again, doubling frequent transit service and more than doubling the number of people who have access to frequent transit service.
I think the number is 0.00042 billion.
I'm hearing a lot of conflicting numbers here. Would you clear this up for us?
That's not even how the... I'm bad at math, okay, listeners?
Yeah. It's not $42,000, James.
Get out your calculators. Yeah, so to put it in context, I think it's helpful to refer to these highway projects, which each individual highway project, which is usually only a few miles long, is billions of dollars. The original Fast Tracks plan from 2.4 from 2004 was $4.5 billion. Ultimately, I think so far they've spent actually more like $5+ billion. Again, other cities around the country have passed those types of funding measures multiple times over the last 20 years. So that's the scale of investment we're thinking about. Like, if we were to do something similar to Fast Tracks, similar to what we spend on highways, similar to what other cities have done, what would that look like? So our proposal is $420 million a year over the next 10 years. So that is $4.2 billion. That would be enough to increase transit service levels 43%. The original Fast Tracks plan was 30%. This would get us to 43% higher transit service levels if we concentrate it in the highest density, highest potential ridership parts of the region. We can double the number of frequent transit routes. We can more than double the percent of the population that's within walking distance of a frequent transit route. So it would be literally 65% of the people who live in the entire RTD region, which is huge, would be able to walk to a frequent transit route. And we would have enough money for some of the capital improvement that we've talked about, like adding more bus rapid transit so it has a dedicated lane and it's not stuck in traffic, adding bus stop amenities, adding some new routes to places like Red Rocks or the airport, being able to support some micro transit service in lower density parts of the region, investing in our workforce so that we make sure we've got the operators to run the buses and the trains. We think all of that is doable with this focus on buses and service. We can get an immense benefit for the entire region for the same cost as basically expanding a few miles of highway.
This front loads capital investment. Can you talk a little bit about kind of the thought behind how it changes over time?
Yeah, so you can't wave a magic wand and tomorrow we have double the level of bus service, right? You need to hire more bus drivers. You probably need to acquire some more buses. You want to be thoughtful. So we think RTD could probably increase bus service levels, 5 to 6% per year. So to get where we want to get within 10 years, we'll gradually ratchet it up. So we don't need the full $420 million per year for service only in those first few years. So in those early years, we can take some of that money and use it for these capital improvement projects. And then as those are paid off, we transition to the service. And the idea is it would be in perpetuity because you can't pay for service today and not tomorrow, right? Like you want to sustain the service levels going forward. So this would be a permanent investment, but within 10 years, we could get to the point of having double the frequent transit service that we have today.
So earlier on, we'd be buying some buses, maybe painting some lanes, trying to...
Improving bus stops, all of those things.
Okay. And, RTD has trouble filling operator positions today. I'm just thinking, if you expand the kind of required amount of operators by presumably 43%, how do we kind of square the circle when it comes to workforce?
That is definitely a real challenge. I do not want to deny that. It's not just here in Denver. It is across the country. At the same time, there are transit agencies across the country that are increasing service levels and have figured out strategies to maintain the workforce. Even here in Denver, RTD has come a long way in building back its workforce and really shrinking the gap between the number of employees they have and the number of employees they want to have. So they've made progress on that. And again, part of our idea is to increase the amount of funding that's available for recruiting and retaining workers. And some of that is just basic wages. I mean, it's a hard job. You're dealing with the public. The public is angry most of the time, so we want to compensate them for the level of work that they're doing, but it could pay for things like building more bathrooms at stations and stops around the system so that they can have the dignity of having a decent bathroom break and things like that. So yes, it is absolutely a challenge, but it is, not completely intractable. There are things that we can do to address it, and with more funding, that makes it all the more easier to address that challenge.
Plus, people might be a little less angry or a little less vocal on the bus if the bus is coming all the time and they didn't miss the last one or didn't have to wait 30 minutes, etc. I think all the time about, my husband, he has become a person who now takes the bus more often. Very love that for him. And
transit building.
He just reminded me, somewhat recently, when he was, looking to take the bus, and there was a person, in a wheelchair, waiting at the bus stop, and then the bus pulls up, and they say, oh, no, it's full. We have no room for you. And my husband was able to get onto the bus, but the person in the wheelchair was just oh, okay, I'll just have to wait for the next one. That's just, insane. That's just insane. So that status quo is, not something that I think any of us want to stick with. And we should be really proud of actually saying, if we move forward, here's how it actually improves people's lives. How do we think we could fund it? What have we learned from how other cities have funded transit? Again, we have taken a lot of strides in Colorado. We have increased transportation funding in the last few years. That has happened. But we're looking at, not just saying, oh, we could take this money from another place. We're probably looking at, new revenue. What do we know from what other cities have done? What's successful here?
Yeah, and it can be some reallocation of existing funding. Again, if you look at CDOT, the State Department of Transportation, their 10-year funding plan, only 4% of it is for transit right now. And the vast majority of it is for highway widening and highway-related projects. Yeah. So we absolutely have an opportunity to reallocate some of the literally billions of dollars that CDOT is currently spending. But also, you're right. The reality is this very likely will require new funding, and especially this moment in time when we really cannot rely on the federal government to be helping invest in our current transit needs. We need to look locally. What can we do here locally? And that's what other cities around the country have been doing. And a lot of times it comes down to increasing taxes, whether it's a sales tax or a property tax or a business tax of some sort. We have not identified this is the right funding mechanism. We want to get agreement around what's possible with new funding and agree that we all want to achieve that and then figure out what the right funding source is. But voters across the country have been willing to say, yes, this is something I'm willing to contribute to with my taxpayer dollars, because I think it'll be incredibly beneficial for the community and probably help me save money personally. It's the same thing with the sidewalk fee. People said, yes, I'm willing to contribute. I'm willing to put my money into this to make it happen. And so we think that appetite is here in Denver too. We just need our leaders to get on board and be willing to put the question to the voters.
Yeah.
There are also, it just should be said, a lot of people that live in the RTD service area. We're not talking about kind of a niche part of, the state. This is not the Roaring Forks Valley. It's about half the population of the state that, currently lives in the Front Range, and more than half of the Front Range is in the RTD service area. And we're talking about, I think it's 2.8 million people. So whatever. Don't quote me about the population figures. But this is a huge quantity of people. And so it can be, I think people get resistant in some ways whenever you start talking about like tax and funding, but like for a very small amount of money that an individual property owner could pay, or that an individual sort of taxpayer could pay, you can get a lot of return. You've already mentioned, I mean, in Fast Tracks, we voted a really small sales tax on ourselves that then was able to, over the last 20 years, spend about like $6 billion. So it doesn't, and the population is going to continue to grow within the same service area over time, making us a more attractive place to live because there's transit options available to you. It is also something like that it returns on investment in a way that is pretty straightforward, as opposed to saying like, let's vote to fund some arena, for instance, that like only a certain number of people can ever have the privilege of going and sitting in those seats, versus there's an ever expanding number of people that can take the bus because they live in the service area that we're talking about here.
Yeah, there's so many ways that you get a great return on investment in transit. I mean, even just immediately, transit investments generate way more jobs than like highway and road building projects do. It can save money for residents because it can reduce their household transportation costs if they can drive less. It can save money for governments. Again, why highways are really expensive to build and they're really expensive to maintain. The more we're building car capacity, the more we're creating these long-term liabilities to maintain that infrastructure. Transit requires maintenance as well, but it's far less than road maintenance costs. And, reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, reducing air pollution, allowing people to live more healthy, active lifestyles, all of these things reduce costs for individuals and for the government. So there's a huge return on investment for transit in particular that, like you said, you won't necessarily get with other types of taxpayer-funded initiatives.
And our state investment into transit, I think we all know this, is just like shockingly low. I think the average transit agency in the country, the United States country, gets 27% of its operating funds and 27% of its capital funds from the state. In Colorado, we get 0% of our operating and 3% of our capital. And I think those 3% of capital were like old federal pass-through dollars. Federal never pays for operating, only pays for capital. And so like we have this like just dearth of funding from the state. And so, as I'm thinking through what you're talking about, like we don't know the funding mechanism yet. It's like, well, we could do it through some property tax increase, but also maybe we fund, the whole workforce and, kind of capital expenditure through the state, right? Like maybe there is some way to pair this with funds and spread this out so that we have a system that better replicates the rest of the country in terms of just like how much the state is investing into public transit, and like B, also funds it through like a local tax or something like that. Yeah, I think that your point's well taken. Like we don't know what the best way to do this yet is. Just like get this in front of people, have people talking about it, and have people thinking about it.
And I think you're absolutely right. Like there's multiple agencies that have a role to play here. And it totally makes sense for CDOT to help kind of cover capital costs, because a lot of our priority transit routes through the Denver metro area happen to be CDOT highways, right?
Yeah, right.
Like Federal Boulevard and Colorado Boulevard and Alameda, and these are all state highways. It makes sense for CDOT to be investing in the infrastructure changes that are needed to prioritize transit on those streets. When we're talking about actually how many buses are running per hour, that's RTD's job. That is their number one job, is running buses. And so it makes sense to fund RTD when you're talking about service levels. The bus stops are typically on property that's owned by the cities. And so if cities can step up and allocate more money towards bus stop maintenance, we can divide and conquer, and each different agency can play their role in helping improve our system.
So we're running kind of up against time here. I
had a really important thing.
Well,
I just think we have to coin a name.
This is important.
If Fast Tracks is memorable. It's got you smush the two T's together, so it's only got one T in the center of the word.
Wow.
It's great.
Visionary.
This is not Fast Tracks 2.0, as we've already discussed. But I have a couple pitches for you.
Great.
So one of them was Denver be Bussin. You stole my thunder, but it's not just Denver. So here's two more. How about Wheelie Fast? Maybe is that catchy?
Yeah. What's the third one?
Yeah. So the third one here I had as Asphalt and Furious.
Yeah.
How about that?
Yeah, no bad ideas for sure.
No, but we need a coin to catch.
Let's keep brainstorming,
right? People
for
need
sure.
something.
I want to hear from your listeners. What ideas do they have
Yes.
for naming this initiative?
If you have a great name, please drop it in a comment. Or better yet, give us a 5-star review and leave it in the review as your review.
All right, with that really important business out of the way.
Yes, and we'll keep noodling on it. How can people get involved, right? I don't want just people to hear about this, say, this is awesome. If people want to help make this reality, whether they're just average listeners or whether they're elected officials or to-be elected officials, what can they be doing to help drive this conversation forward?
There's multiple things that people can do. Number one, they can donate to the Denver Streets Partnership. All of this advocacy takes a lot of time and effort, and every dollar helps us stay alive for another day to keep doing this work. They can sign up for our e-newsletter on our website, which is great just not only to stay informed, but to learn about opportunities to then actually take action. So, for example, next Tuesday, October 28th, RTD is holding a public hearing on their Finishing Fast Tracks report. And one of the things we're asking them to do is focus more attention on the fact that we utterly failed to fulfill the promise for enhanced bus service. And that needs to be a key focus for going forward from here.
Yeah.
What do we do next? And so we're encouraging people to either submit their comment online or attend the RTD board meeting and say exactly that. I want better bus service. Let's not forget that that was also something we committed to do and have not made a reality. And so just showing up and saying that you want better transit, and even going so far as saying, I'd be willing to pay more as a taxpayer if I had better transit. It would be worthwhile. That's what our elected leaders need to hear.
Yeah, that's awesome. Great. Well, dear listener, please go ahead and get involved, do all that stuff. Please donate to the Denver Streets Partnership and make your voice heard, right? Like, this is the successful initiatives of the past that have happened since I've been involved in the advocacy scene have like really come about because just like people kept raising hell about it, and we like knocked on doors and we talked to politicians, and like soon enough we had a sidewalk fund created, right? Like that came about because of, in part, Jill, your leadership, but also in part because of like a network of people who really wanted to see this happen and made their voices heard. So please get involved, and please keep listening to the Denver Urbanism Podcast.
Well, thank you for listening. The Denver Urbanism Podcast is a production of longtime blog Denver Infill and sister blog Denver Urbanism. We invite you to follow along online at denverurbanism.com.
This is a test. This is a test. Joe, will you speak something wise?
Hello, good morning.
Wiser.
I have to be wise. I barely had any coffee.
Phil Weiser.